Let's talk about some other specific names. Anand, what about telecom? What do you do there? I mean, Bharti Airtel has been taken to the cleaners. I won't ask you about an investment thesis in Comm because that's a difficult one. But telecom would largely probably center around Bharti Airtel, maybe to an extent idea. What do you do here? I mean, is the meltdown giving you investors a good opportunity, or still there are lots of clouds and therefore stay away from the pack?
Well, if you're an institutional investor, I think you need to have some allocation to telecom, and from that point of view, Bharti is probably the only game in town. From a retail investor point of view, I think the near-term fall has been quite substantial, and therefore the bounce may be due. However, so there are pros and cons on both sides. One, the leverage is going to play against it, but on the other hand, the fact that there is lower competition, and it is unlikely that you'll have the frenzy that we earlier witnessed on 3G coming back anytime soon, with so many licenses being cancelled on 2G, that itself should give you space to grow. The flip side of the argument, however, is that the basic facilities, services that are on offer today in telecom in terms of voice are pretty much now reaching a kind of saturation point, and therefore we have to look at other areas from where to grow. Data services are the obvious space, and there is huge potential there, but I don't see too many offerings there, at least on the consumer space, which are making any sense. So, a slowdown in business because of market saturation compared with a betterment of business potential because of lack of competition kind of, has to play itself out a little while. I think the valuations are reasonably attractive, at least in the near term, for one to be, not the valuations, the stock price fall makes it a reasonable attraction for a small term bounce. Valuations are still stretched somewhat. I think they are still close to 18 to 20 times current year earnings, and therefore from that point of view are not necessarily a very comfortable place to be.
Mind you, there's a small block deal that has happened in Bharti Airtel as well. I believe 25 lakh shares have been traded, a bit of an uptick coming there. The other argument, Anand, that I've been hearing is on the financial space, wherein there are hands who are coming and saying that, hey, some of the PSU banks available at 0.3, 0.4 times book, and therefore could be a good place to start doing some bottom fishing. And there are an equal and opposite number of people who are saying that probably stick to the private guys, or maybe stick to some of the other safer banks which might be available at 1, 1.2, 1.3 times book. What's your prognosis?
I think this is a debate between growth and value. The market has over a period of time become very, very growth focused, and therefore tends to pay huge premium for near-term growth. And when the growth stumbles, the falls are equally large. I think we see that in much of the market today, where for example, infrastructure stocks went up to the roof, albeit knowing that the ROEs are very low, but just because the growth momentum was at that time intact. Now, if you're looking at PSU banks, the real argument that you are making is that the cycle will turn. And as of today, the NPA levels are probably understated. The restructured assets need to be written off. So you have to be a little careful about which ones of the banks are worth looking at. But the market is clearly factoring in that the entire restructured asset book, for example, can be written off. And at that point, the bank may be trading at maybe one-time book or perhaps a little lower. In such a situation, it's clearly a value stock, because, you'll have these banks also giving you some dividend, and the dividend yield, at least on last year's dividend, in many of the cases has now reached levels of 4 or 5%, which is fairly attractive. So from a value investor's perspective, I think some of those public sector banks are an interesting place to be. The private sector argument, of course, is one of growth, and the fact that, they will continue to gain market share because of better services, better technology, and so on. Which is valid, but in the current market, I think, when you're not necessarily looking for strong growth, I'm not sure that necessarily that is going to be the place where you'll make some money, or whether you have any major margin of safety.
What's your view on oil and marketing companies, Anand?
Never had a view on that, Tanveer, because I think that is purely dependent on what the government wants them to make, and the government, as I see it, wants them to survive. So they will survive, and I don't know why anybody should be looking at owning any of these, frankly.
Well, those are some of the stocks which are taking a strong hit in today's session, are deep down in the red. I don't know whether you've spoken about IT, but given what's been happening or the views that are coming out on Wipro, and of course in the background the fact that there has been a fair amount of de-rating in earnings, could there be a contrarian position call being taken on IT? You think there's potential of upside from here?
So, on the one hand, the rupee is going to continue to fall. On the other hand, there are some headwinds that are there in terms of the business. I think as the US economy revives, and hopefully the election moves out of the way, you will find that the IT sector can start perhaps growing a little stronger than it has been growing over the last few quarters or so. A lower valuation certainly helps. So not that across the board there is lower valuation. I think TCS is actually quite expensive right now. But, an Infosys or a Wipro, though they are suffering from internal issues and have not been able to show growth momentum, probably are reasonable value picks, assuming that things will sort themselves out, both from a macro point of view as well as from the internal issues. You may have to have a slightly extended period over which you will be looking to invest, but these are reasonably good quality companies with very strong cash flows, and there is no particular reason to assume that they will always be in the doldrums.
Okay, Anand, before we let you go, really, in such a scenario, we've discussed a lot already. Where do you find favor, if at all? Or would you be wary of how the mood is right now and therefore believe that there will be lower levels for most of the market at large for people to invest their money?
Yeah, hi.
The market may continue to fall another couple of 100 points, but you have to look beyond this, the frontline index and look at the stocks, because stocks tend to have a cycle of their own. So there are many stocks which probably have already reached levels where, in some cases, below even their 2008 low and so on. And some of those may be fairly interesting stocks to look at, despite where the market goes. So right now, one should be looking beyond the headlines, really.
Speaking, so we'll have to go across there.
वो इसलिए इस मुद्दे पर पीछे हटना नहीं चाहते। आपको लगता है कि आप बीजेपी जल्दी पावर में आने के लिए ये सब कर रही है, आपको पर्सनली निशाना बना रही है, या फिर मिड टर्म पोल भी आप देखें?
देखिए, मैंने जो कुछ कहना था वो मैंने अपनी स्टेटमेंट में कह दिया है। उसके अलावा इस मुद्दे पे मुझे कहने के लिए कोई और जरूरी मैं समझता नहीं।
Look at the international cooperation. What is more domestic framework, because we are Brother Samantha from Indian Express. Your second term as Prime Minister, you've been bogged down by many constraints, be it coalition, be it protests on the street or parliamentary deadlock like this. Do you have any regret for the 5 things you would have wanted to do but you've not been able to do till now?
Well, there are lots of things we would have liked to do. We would certainly like to lay the foundations of a 9% growth rate, but international events have not helped. But also, I think lack of cohesion in our domestic politics has also been a factor. There have been, for example, difficulties in bringing into effect the goods and services tax. Now, the goods and services tax, if it is agreed upon and implemented, can lead to an increase in gross domestic product of our country by 1 to 2%. It will streamline the tax system, minimize scope for evasion, but there are problems because we are not able to push. There are similarly other things. I also would very much like that the opposition would give us a chance to work in a manner that the basic problems of India of poverty, ignorance and disease can be tackled effectively. Unfortunately, from one crisis to another, but BJP policy has been to disrupt parliament. These are all diversionary tactics, and one has only 24 hours at one's disposal. If one is preoccupied all the time with handling these diversionary taxation, naturally that affects the capacity and the ability of the government to attend to its more fundamental task, which I have always said is to grapple with the problem of mass poverty, ignorance and disease, which still afflict millions and millions of our citizens. Well, let me say that the development in Parliament are a source of great concern to me. But when I look to the future of our country, the way things have gone in Assam, these ethnic tensions that have disturbed peace in Assam, that part of Assam which is in the Bodoland Territorial Council administration, is certainly a cause of worry. Similarly, the fact that thousands and thousands of people who have been living in various parts of our country, particularly in deep south, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, have chosen, or for some reason or the other they don't feel secure in being there and go back to the northeast, is not good for the promotion of national unity and national cohesion. I have also said the growth of growing communal tensions is yet another area where I sincerely believe all right-thinking people should sit together and control these matters. I have also said that Naxalism is yet another menace which, if not controlled, can hurt both our national cohesion as well as the rate of economic development of our country. If you look at the Naxal affected areas, all these areas are very rich in mineral wealth. If that mineral wealth of India is to be exploited for the purposes of the benefit of our people, then we need peace. And therefore, if Naxalism is not brought under control, if political parties do not work together to deal with this menace, there will be a severe setback, there could be a severe setback to the normal growth processes of our country.
Okay, that was the Prime Minister's address, but we were just taking the final comments from Anand. And Anand, sorry for that interruption, but I had to go across to the Prime Minister. But you were speaking about your thesis about whether or not this is a good time to invest, and if at all, where would you park money, or advise parking money rather?
Well, as I already explained, you are looking at near term, at least those sectors where a weaker rupee can actually help. So almost all export-oriented companies. I think a few companies like banks where the valuations have corrected quite steeply. But you really have to look beyond the top line and look for smaller companies where the prices have already corrected perhaps fairly significantly, and where the uptick may come in faster than the index would. You have to actually assume that the market will start recovering before the economy will recover, because at least the economic numbers will recover, because don't forget the economic numbers come with a huge time lag. And what you are seeing today, for example, is what has actually happened already in the past, and it's not necessarily going to be a lead indicator.
All right, Anand, appreciate your time on the show this afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us and giving us your perspective on the market, and also stock-specific strategies, views at that.